All things considered, it had been a weird couple of years for the followers of the wandering preacher named Jesus. It started off with him doing the usual stuff that wandering preachers do, like talking to crowds and explaining matters of faith, but things took a really weird turn when their teachers started to heal sick people and perform crazy things like bringing back the dead and multiplying food from seemingly nowhere. His 12 core followers, known as the disciples, followed him on his tour of Israel as he taught in a new and interesting way, with some folks even claiming he was the long-awaited prophet that would bring about a new age for the Jewish people, overthrowing their Roman oppressors and restoring the good old days. However, his teaching ruffled more than a few feathers as he went about pointing out the flaws in society, and when his finger pointed at the leaders of the Jewish religion, that was a step too far. Using some of his claims against him and convincing one of his closest followers to betray him, the prominent religious leaders of the day put pressure on the Roman authorities, who, wanting to maintain the stability of this far corner of the empire, had him sentenced to death by crucifixion. So it seemed to end, and his followers dispersed. And then when it couldn't get weirder, it got weirder. Like something from the old stories, their great teacher didn't stay dead, even though the Romans had made sure he was. But although he wasn't dead, and had proved as much to his followers, he told them that he was still on borrowed time, and that soon the mantle would pass to them to continue the work of God on earth. Just as soon as he'd entered their lives, he had left, but with one final message for them: wait for the helper I will send you. Heeding his words, the disciples rented a room in Jerusalem, where they met regularly to await what was to come next. During their wait, they discussed a replacement for Judas, the disciple who'd betrayed their teacher. Outside, the city was preparing for a Jewish harvest holiday, the Feast of Weeks, which brought with it people from all around. The helper that Jesus said would come arrived in the form of a great noise like wind, and fire seemed to rest upon the disciples. Boldly they stepped out into the crowds to proclaim their master's message, and found they now had the ability to speak in other languages. Their declaration garnered a mixed response from the crowds. Some asked what this was all about, while others commented that the disciple had had one too many glasses of wine. However, Peter was not having this, since it was only 9 in the morning, so he stood up and became the first recorded street preacher in Christianity. Some were convinced by Peter's impassioned speech and decided to see what this new Jewish sect was all about. The believers continued in prayer, communion, preaching, and helping those in need. Whilst going to the temple to worship one day, one of these good deeds got the disciples John and Peter in hot water with religious authorities. Peter had healed a crippled beggar and had given another preach to those assembled, but it had ruffled feathers amongst some folk, and the two were arrested and brought before the religious leaders, the Sanhedrin. Peter answered their questions with the same zeal he had displayed in his previous preaches, and the leaders noted that they were the followers of that troublesome Jesus fellow that they'd only just got rid of. They ordered them not to continue preaching about him, but felt they couldn't really punish them, as people were praising God for the healing of a lame beggar who was well known in the city, and who was stood there at the hearing. Naturally, the disciples decided not to heed the Sanhedrin's edict. Continuing as they had been doing, the followers of Jesus shared their wealth, praying and meeting together. Minus a blip where some believers lied and fell foul of God's wrath, the believers continued to meet and dish out the occasional healing. This, of course, annoyed the Sanhedrin, who had them arrested again. That same night, however, an angel of God released them from their cell, and confused guards found their cell empty, reporting as much to their elders. At this point they were informed that Peter and John were at the temple preaching again, so the guard was sent to fetch them. Once again the two men were questioned and were warned that they were not to preach about Jesus or his teaching, and were told to cease and desist, to which Peter essentially replied, "No." This put the assembly in the mind to have the two men taken away and executed. However, their hand was stayed by one of their own, a man named Gamaliel, who asked for the two men to be taken away for a little while. Gamaliel was a respected teacher and addressed the Sanhedrin, who respectfully listened to his opinion. "Does anyone remember Theudas?" he asked. "He was that guy who said he was a big thing. He had hundreds of followers. He got killed and all his followers vanished. It all came to nothing. Then there was that other guy, Judas, from up north, who started a revolt. Remember him? No? Well, that's because he got killed and it came to nothing again. So let me propose this. Let's leave them alone. Let this whole Jesus thing run its course. Because if it's something they've just made up, it'll just die out. But if it's something from God, then we're not going to be able to stop them." Convinced by Gamaliel's speech, the Sanhedrin brought John and Peter back, ordered them flogged and sent on their way, with the same warnings about preaching as before. Suffering for the cause spurred both of them and the rest of the believers on the way of Jesus Christ into carrying it on, as they'd been doing, with renewed zeal. That said, it wasn't long before their actions and preaching caused public upset. Stephen, a believer with a great passion for the cause, got into a great argument with the members of a synagogue known as the Synagogue of the Freed Men. Not being able to defeat him in debate, they brought him to the Sanhedrin with the same sort of claims that had been brought against Jesus: blasphemy. When questioned about the charges laid against him, Stephen launched into a great speech, detailing the long history of the Jewish people from their humble beginnings to the present day. However, he ended this monologue by berating them for not realising that Jesus was the one sent from God they'd been waiting for. This made them angry, but when Stephen looked to the skies and claimed he could see Jesus stood at the right hand of God, this was a step too far, and those gathered grabbed him, dragged him out of the city walls, and stoned him to death. Amongst the barrage of projectiles, he prayed that God would not hold it against them, before breathing his last and becoming the first Christian martyr. One Pharisee that was a witness to this event looked after the coats of those who stoned Stephen to death. This young man decided that this new Jesus sect was a threat, one which he would help destroy personally, but his story is a tale for another time. Thanks for watching. If you're so inclined, like, share, subscribe, or check out one of the links in the description, or maybe check out my other video on screen. For the first few episodes in this series, there are no contemporary historical accounts I can point to, so I have to use the one we do have, the Book of Acts. I'll stick some links in the description for some extra reading, and a link to an online version of the Book of Acts that you can view in various translations. So, until I cover the next part of the Christian story, grab a drink and keep asking questions.